update at the very least we can. Hello everyone, welcome back to the FASTER Project EV webinar series. Today's topic is incredibly popular, as we can see from all the attendees flooding in to have a look. We are going to be talking about EV charging infrastructure in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland notoriously has by far the lowest number of rapid chargers per electric vehicle capita, or per capita in general, out of all of the UK and Ireland. So what's the reasons behind this? What's the story so far? What's been done to resolve it? There's been some very big news on that as recently as yesterday, which we shall no doubt cover over the next hour or two. We're prepared to let this run as long as you're prepared to stay and as long as you're prepared to ask the pressing questions. But as is tradition, we're going to give an update on the FASTER project itself to begin proceedings. And of course, the focus will be on the Northern Irish aspect of the FASTER project. Over to Donal.
Apologies, guys. Sorry, I'm just trying to still get some of the panelists sorted. But thank you to Euan for the introduction, and it's great to see so many people joining us this morning. I think it's the most we've had for any of our live webinars so far. So great interest. As Neil said, or as Euan said, rather, I'll give you just a very quick update on where we're at with the FASTER project at the minute. As Sharon updated you last month, we're moving forward with the infrastructure project across all three regions at the minute. Scotland, the partners there, are currently finalising contract agreements with the CPO, and we hope to make that announcement over the next few weeks. So they're just finalising all the legal bits and pieces there. In the Republic of Ireland, Louth County Council are moving forward with the procurement of a design consultancy who will develop the network infrastructure and oversee the procurement and the implementation of the infrastructure across the 6 border counties. And in Northern Ireland, we'll have Professor Neil Hewitt from Ulster University joining the webinar at some point, hopefully, and he can give us an update in terms of the work that University of Ulster has been doing. And also we hope that Neil will be able to share the sites that we have assessed and selected provisionally, at least for Northern Ireland, just to give you an indication of where the FASTER charge points will be installed over the next year or so. Just a quick little bit about the work that Southwest College has been doing in recent weeks. You've hopefully had a chance to see some of the EVTalk review films presented by Euan and Rick Willemere, and those have been getting great feedback, great viewing numbers over the past few weeks. We launched the latest film last Thursday, which focused on the Kia EV6 and the Ioniq 5. And there's been lots of great comments on that so far, and really impressive viewing figures and viewing time on that one. And some of the others as well are doing big things at the minute. We're working with a huge range of partners at the minute to continually provide updates on where the project is at, working with our funders, working with our other project partners. And we had the latest steering group meeting yesterday, so it was great to catch up with all the partners, and things are moving forward with the project. So we're delighted to be at this point. And I suppose I just wanted to say, as part of my update, to say a big word of thanks to everybody that has taken part in the webinars this year, either as a panelist or has just joined as a participant. Anybody that's asked questions, contributed to the chat. It's all been really appreciated, and we hope to have your support again next year as we continue to deliver on the project. I believe Neil has managed to get logged in. So Neil, if you want to switch on your camera now as well, and give us, I suppose, a quick update in terms of the work that you've been doing.
Okay, thank you, and apologies. We have a school account, and therefore my name's actually come up on it, which is good, rather than Zoe, my PA. But anyway, so what we've been doing over the last while is working closely with NIEM to identify the potential sites within the constraints of the project. So we have to have 24/7 access. We have to have council-owned sort of sites. So it came fairly early in the project that we would use leisure centre car parks as our first pass, because A, there's the space, B, there's access, C, there's council ownership, and D, they usually have a transformer, electricity supply of some decent size near to hand. So working closely with each of the partner councils, started to identify sites that were appropriate, and ones which they would have liked unfortunately fell out for a number of reasons. Sometimes the power capacity just wasn't there. Other times there was another constraint of the ownership of the car park, i.e. former DFI owned car parks had a sort of statute on them that they couldn't charge for, things going on the site. So that included EV charging. That was under review, but we didn't have, the capability to wait on that. So we just, through a process of conversation, iteration, elimination, and any other forms of those sort of words you can put together, came up with sites. And even then, as we think about the goal of the project, to have as Pamela talks about it, the necklace of sites around Northern Ireland in our case, in rural Northern Ireland. We'll lose some even now. One, unfortunately, a good site, strategically placed, we had to give up because the council needed the site for updating flood defences, for example. So there's always these ongoing real life situations which sort of get in the way. Well, not get in the way, just make life more interesting. So we've identified our sites, and now today, actually this afternoon, we're going through an iteration of the procurement process to try and work our way through how we get this process out there for 19 sites, which is a mixture of single and double chargers out there for some kind. So obviously to install and get operational for us, obviously in return for remuneration, so NEC contracts and all sorts of good things. So that's what we're working up this afternoon, and hopefully probably soon after Christmas as possible, we will get our first pass at our contracts out there for people to consider and think about what they're going to have to do to bid into these things. Obviously there's a finite amount of money, but we hope the budget is sufficient to install the charges across the partner councils as best we can. And we've done our due diligence. We've made sure the electrical supply is correct. We've hopefully managed to reserve all those with NIEM. They're adjacent to, if not hopefully relatively close to, major traffic flows, so that as EVs grow in number, there is a growing customer base. And I think we hope then, once we get this procurement process underway, we'll start putting these things on the ground. So that's a very brief summary of the Northern situation as it stands at the moment. If there's any comments or questions, Donald? No.
Yeah, Neil, I don't know, have you got access to the site, the proposed locations, or the map? If I don't know if you're able to share
that. I'll just give me a few seconds just to bring that up. I should have had that up earlier, but I'm just going from back to back meetings as usual, bring this up onto the top big screen. I can share a screen with you. Don't have a few buttons and I remember how to use Zoom. The wee share button.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, screen button. There it is there. And then that one there. Share. But you can see that okay. So we can see our proposed sites as worked out. We can see that we lost Strabane due to, say, the DFI flood defences work, which is absolutely necessary. You know, Strabane has been known to flood before. And then late in the day, Belfast City Council suggested an interest, so we've investigated and identified a number of sites around the Belfast City Council area, which, if there's additional monies available or whenever approach the magic, EBR can come up with it with SEUPB, we will visit these and ensure that they're part of the process. So there's our map. As you can see, we've filled in many of the gaps. Unfortunately, lost one in Strabane, and unfortunately, the North Coast, Causeway Coast and Glens Council, unfortunately, weren't able to get involved. So we were still a natural gap there, but it was beyond our control at this stage. So that's us. We hope. Donald, is there anything else you'd like to see or hear, or anybody else would?
No, I think, Neil, that's great. What we'll do is we'll also get the map with the proposed sites out on our socials and on our website at some point over the next few days as well, just for anybody that can't join us live this morning, just so that they're aware of those. But no, Neil, that's great. Thank you for the update. And I suppose we'll hand back over to Euan, and if there is any questions, they can be popped into the Q&A or any comments into the chat. I'm sure there'll be a few things that we'll need to address at some point throughout the session.
And there's some nice in-depth publications for those who want to get into that sort of thing emerging and how you actually do this. So, for those who want to get into it in great detail, we'll duly provide those on your website.
Yes, brilliant. Thanks, Neil.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Donald, as well. Picking up on a couple of points there, as soon as you shared your screen there, Neil, to show where the sites are going to be, you could hear the collective sound of 100-odd print screen buttons being pressed on keyboards across the land. Everyone's taking notes to see where this infrastructure is going to go. In terms of...
I should say our blobs of our symbols are sufficiently large enough just to give that
a rough indication,
shall we say.
Yeah. Oh no, that's entirely fair. Entirely fair.
We've experienced this before. You do all these agreements and all these details, and then when it comes to the physicality, when somebody actually starts putting JCB to ground, you suddenly you can't do something. So there is a movement, and we expect that.
Superb. Yeah. Good to know. Oh, yes, entirely fair, isn't it? In terms of kind of going into the main event now, the EV charging infrastructure in Northern Ireland webinar. Before we start fully, we have our first poll of the day. We just want to know who's joining us today. What's your involvement with electric vehicles? So, are you a site host or owner of charging infrastructure? Are you a provider of charging infrastructure? Are you an EV fleet manager or driver, or just a general kind of EV driver? You can choose your answers there. Just want to see who's joining us today, basically. And whilst that's happening, a couple of things that have been going on in the webinar chat. So I've posted the link to the latest Faster Project EV review, which is the Hyundai Ioniq 5 versus EV6 that we took to Whiteley Wind Farm and used the cars themselves to power a picnic. Honestly, the work of Rick, Callum and Ollie at Generate Media to put that video together, complete with some pretty epic drone shots and stuff, it's come across really well. So definitely check out that video. We're all very proud of it. In terms of, there's a couple of questions that have ended up in the chat rather than the Q&A. If you stick them in the Q&A, it means that we can answer them by text as well as by chat. But yeah, Stephen Bassett asked a very good question about, is there going to be charging tariffs introduced, presumably on ESB ecars? And don't worry, that is very much going to be covered in this panel session today. Similarly, Kieran, you were asking about any higher power chargers than 50 kilowatts. Again, don't worry, we'll be chatting about those as part of today's session. There's some other very good questions that have come through, but please do put them in the Q&A as opposed to the chat, and it means that Donal and the panelists can have a look through those and answer those as well, in case we don't have enough time to cover them by chat. So let's have a look at who's with us today. Let's share these results with you. So we do have some site hosts, and you could have a very important role to play in Northern Ireland's EV charging infrastructure. If you have that land where chargers can go, then whether it's within the FASTER project or not, that would be invaluable. Similarly, interesting to see charging infrastructure providers and networks present with us today as well. No doubt the FASTER project and the on-street charging, on-street charge point residential scheme that is being applied for by Anne and her team, who will introduce in a few minutes' time. That will be of interest to you as well, no doubt. And yeah, we've got some fleet managers, but also let us know in the chat if you don't fit any of those particular kind of boxes. It'll be interesting to see what your involvement is. So what we have now is, of course, the main session, EV charging infrastructure in Northern Ireland. As you can see, we have a packed panel session today. So if everyone would like to switch their cameras and mics on, we have Mark McCall from the Electric Vehicle Association of Northern Ireland. We have John Byrne from ESB ecars, Chris Kelly from EasyGo, Thomas O'Hagan from Weev, and Artt from the Northern Ireland Local Authority Consortium that's applying for on-street residential charge point funding. Very interesting work going on there. Do we have Leo in the chat, actually? Or is Leo one of he's the fallen one, unfortunately, who's not been able to log in, Zoom being traditionally awkward about it. Donal, have we got Liam with us?
No, Leo unfortunately hasn't been able, I don't think, to get logged in this morning. He's had issues, I think, with firewalls and accessing Zoom.
Fair play.
No, I don't think Leo can join us.
Well, we shall miss you, Leo, but thank you very much for attempting to join us today. We've got Chris Maguire from NIE Networks, John Starkey from Department for Infrastructure, and Jody O'Boyle from the Utility Regulator for Northern Ireland. So if anyone is going to solve any kind of bottlenecks in rolling out more rapid charging infrastructure and EV charging infrastructure in general in Northern Ireland, it's going to be this A team that we have assembled right here today. So I suppose that if we start off with some very kind of quick fire questions, because I want to set the story of how Northern Ireland's network has grown so far, because of course, ESB ecars is kind of interchangeably referred to as the Northern Irish charging network, although I'm sure that EasyGo and Weev and McCall and the many other private operators who are joining the fray would of course beg to differ. But in terms of the very first kind of network to kind of grow out, certainly it'd be interesting to know more, John, about the history of ecars and how it's come to be. So in terms of what was the first, again, just being very quick to kind of bring us up to scratch here, but what was the first public charging infrastructure to be installed in Northern Ireland? Do you remember when and where that was, what type of infrastructure it was, and how much it cost to use?
Yeah, thanks, Ian. How you doing, everyone? And good morning. So John Byrne, by way of introduction, I'm the head of ecars. I wasn't actually around or working in this position back when this started, but I can give you a brief history lesson for sure. So the network that's there, largely there now, the largest sort of network that's there at the moment, was commissioned and constructed largely in the period 2011 to 2014, over that sort of period. And at that time, there was a consortium established. Originally, the members were the Department for Regional Development. Now that's actually now the Department for Infrastructure. There were a number of local councils involved. Ourselves, ESB ecars, were involved. NIE Networks, I believe the Utility Regulator at the time, and then a couple of privateers, including Donnelly Motors. That certainly was the nucleus of the partnership that was formed. Most of the initial funding came through grants from OLEV at the time. I think it was plugged in places or words to that effect. I think that was the name of the program. Anyway, that consisted, that network at the time, of largely fast chargers, 22 kilowatts, with a number of rapid chargers as well, spread around the 6 counties. The manufacturers of the equipment, which we now know were a legacy of indigenous manufacturers of chargers, as well as some of the more standard sort of names that those in the electrical industry would be familiar with, ABB and the like. About 320 standard chargers, 17 rapid chargers right across the jurisdiction. As people will know, they're in a range of locations, council car parks, there's a lot on street. We've some in service stations, and there are across all counties in Northern Ireland. I think that was a prerequisite really of the partnership, that it would be a jurisdictionally wide deployment, but there is a larger concentration where the population centres are, and we'd see that in all of the other areas we're active in. That sort of persisted over the decade, more or less, to 2022 that we're in now. A lot of the original assets that were installed remain in situ. The assets themselves transferred out of the ownership of NIE into ecars last year. At that time, a lot of the chargers, in and around the uptime or the availability, the reliability metrics, I beg your pardon, were very low. So we identified through customer input analysis from our own back-end systems the worst performing 20% of the network. That was about 30 chargers that were taken out and replaced with more sort of up-to-date assets. Where we are now is we're about to embark on a program to replace the entire infrastructure. That will mean the replacement of every fast charger on the network that's up there currently at all locations. The existing rapid chargers will be upgraded, and there will be an extra 20 rapid locations installed. We have applied for connection at some of those locations. Well, I would say the majority of those connections, similarly to your previous talker or speaker here, on that. Sorry, this is just a phone call coming in there, Euan, sorry. Similar to your previous speaker, not all of those locations were suitable, predominantly due to the amount of reinforcement required at that location, and ergo the amount of money that would have to be spent to facilitate connection or an upgraded connection at that location. And the final sort of piece then is a focus on additional hub build out, which is what we term sort of high powered charging. That'll be kind of minimum 200 kilowatt units stacked together in sort of lots. Similarly, to what you see like in most other sort of major jurisdictions that EV drivers would operate in, or what we just call hub models. That's our focus really after we complete the complete refurbishment of the existing network. There is a question there around charging, I think. So if you want, we can leave that to later. I can address it now, the network.
Well, yeah, actually, I was going to say you've kind of raised 2 or 3 interesting points, one of which is, of course, that ESB ecars is currently free to use. And that is ironically a sore point for EV drivers. It's rare that you find a large group of customers saying, we want to pay you more. But obviously, such is the advantage of charging tariffs for stopping misuse of charging networks by people who just, sponge the free lecky and leave their car on rapid chargers overnight and so on. I understand that, and this kind of comes on to a point which I was going to bring up later, but we might as well cover it now, which is that there is the EV Infrastructure Task Force, and that one of the key points that's been raised is the need to introduce pay to charge, which I believe is meant to happen this month. So if you're able to tell us a bit more on that, please.
Yeah, the network has been free to use since its inception, as I sort of outlined. We've only taken ownership of it in the last 12 months. The fact that it is free to charge up there, as you rightly point out, has led to some less desirable behaviours and etiquettes that have established themselves around a lot of the chargers. For example, people getting the charge but staying on the network for sort of an excessive period. In all of the other jurisdictions that we operate in the Republic and right across GB and right across GB at this stage, we were one of the first to introduce an overstay fee in GB. That's been copied by a lot of the other CPOs now. That is in an effort to, in areas where we have huge utilisation of our chargers, particularly in city centre London, it's to prevent people from sitting on the chargers, and it allows customers and EV drivers to top up. There's more than enough time for them to get ample charge into their vehicles, top up and move on. At the moment in all of our jurisdictions, in the Republic of Ireland, that limit is 45 minutes. So if you stay over 45 minutes on a rapid charger, okay, so it doesn't apply to fast chargers, the limit there is at 10 hours. And I got a lot of questions as to why it's 10 hours. That seems like an excessive amount of time. And at first glance, it can appear to be an excessive amount of time, but there's two reasons predominantly why the 10-hour figure was chosen. We're conscious in a lot of cities that the availability of driveways for people to charge their vehicles is not an option for them. There's a lot of terraced homes, there's a lot of apartments where people don't have the ability to charge off their own tariff and use the public network. The 10 hours therefore was chosen, which would allow people to charge their vehicle overnight and not have to get up, for example, in the middle of the night to take the car off charge without incurring a charge. The other reason was that in car parks, and more specifically in park and ride car parks, what we did was we wanted to allow people to charge their car, allow them an hour to go to work, an 8-hour working day and an hour to come home, again without having to incur a cost. So they were the two drivers behind why a 10-hour figure or a 10-hour limit, I guess, was imposed on the AC or 22 kilowatt chargers. With regard to the introduction of pricing, I have a full team stood up. I'm actually only back from Israel myself. Our back-end provider is working to develop and put in the system. We've prided ourselves for years on an interoperable system north and south of the border. So, regardless of where you were in the island of Ireland, you could roam at will. Now that system is harder to do and harder to implement when you have charging. It's further complicated by the fact that there's different VAT rates, 9% in the Republic versus 20% up here in Northern Ireland. And of course, then there's a foreign exchange consideration. We had initially intended, and our project plan was scheduled to deliver pricing into Northern Ireland in Q4 of this year. It now is going to be at the very end of Q1 of next year before it looks like that will become live. The tariffs, however, the communications, the issuing of new cards to people, because at the moment the cards, as I'm sure you know, they're not assigned to a particular driver or an address, but obviously if you're going to pay for charging, they have to be linked to addresses and bank cards. So that process will obviously begin in advance of that. In advance of the actual turning on of the network. What I can also confirm is we get some questions on, is this going to be turned on right across the network? Like, will it operate only on the fast network or only on the rapid network? I can confirm it'll be switched on right across the network, so it'll apply regardless of what power or what capacity of charger you're on. Overstay fees will most definitely apply. The one other thing I did want to say actually on the overstay fees, because we got a couple of Irish government queries on it yesterday, was that when we initially sought to bring in the overstay fee, we were in regular contact with the Irish EV Owners Association, and then last year when we published an annual customer survey, and I think that's actually coming out next week, that any EV drivers registered can obviously respond to and give their feedback. I think last year we got 11,000 pieces of feedback, in fact. But we asked two specific questions last year around the price that we charge for the overstay fee and the duration did customers feel that the 45 minutes was correct? I think something like in the region of 90% on both counts favoured remaining at the 45%, but increasing what was a fee of around €5 up to €8. And that largely was the stimulus for the kind of current charging regime that you see. And that's likely to be emulated very closely in Northern Ireland when pricing comes in.
A couple of bits of feedback on that from a Scottish perspective before I bring in Chris and Thomas, and then later as well want to have a look at the more kind of DFI / utility regulator side of things as kind of two tangents to go on. But the first one, if we just a couple of points that you'd raised there. In Scotland, the most successful overstay fees are the ones that are £1 / €1 per minute. And then, sort of no maximum upper limit on a rapid charger. And in terms of the 10-hour limit on AC, what we found with a lot of Scottish local authorities on Charge Place Scotland is they might have, say, a 3 or 4 hour time limit during the day, which then stops at around 6 to 8 p.m. and then restarts again at 8 a.m. the next day, which allows local residents to charge overnight, then move their car out the way. So that gives you the perfect balance of commuters and visitors, so on, coming in during the day, getting a meaningful top up and then moving on, and then allowing local residents to charge overnight. It just means that you can kind of service more cars quicker. But in terms of the continued and delayed absence of charging tariffs within ESB ecars, obviously that's something that, well, I mean, in Scotland, we've just had the Scottish Futures Trust report saying that free charging is actively deterring investment from the private sector. But if anything, from the number of planning applications I've seen, that's certainly not been the case in Scotland. What about Northern Ireland then? So I'll start with Chris and then bring yourself in as well, Thomas, obviously from Weev. But EasyGo, obviously you've started off in the Republic of Ireland and you're now venturing into Northern Ireland. Have you found the free local competition to be a barrier at all?
Hi, Euan. Yeah, thanks for having me here today. Yes, it has been a barrier. It's been a pain as well because a lot of people look at us and say that we're gouging for electricity when they can get it for free from elsewhere. But at the end of the day, we're a private company and we still have to pay our own electricity bill. So it did stop us from moving into Northern Ireland sooner, absolutely. And it was mainly because we couldn't bill previously. Now that we can, we have started the process. So as it stopped us with any applications with doing what we're doing in the last year? No, because we knew billing was going to come in eventually. We were hoping it was going to be the end of this year, but as John pointed out, it's going to be next year, the end of Q1. There are challenges there, for putting the billing in, but it is possible. And it is possible to provide it across the island as well. We didn't find it too challenging, setting it up and dealing with the tax rates and things. There's still a few small things to iron out, and with the interoperability and stuff across the island, the jurisdictions. But I think that's I think we're in an unusual situation and scenario on the island compared with a lot of what they're seeing in the EU and particularly in the UK.
Absolutely. And yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned about the delay in moving from Republic of Ireland only to Northern Ireland as a result of that free kind of infrastructure within ESB. But Thomas, of course, Weev was the first mover within Northern Ireland as a homegrown charging infrastructure network. So what prompted you to take the plunge, and obviously has the free established competition been much of a delay to that launch, or has it been impeding your success so far, have you found?
Yeah, I suppose to answer the first question there, I think the state of the network and where it's been and the demand from EV drivers for a much sort of more a service that was reliable for them to use and charges were available was definitely evident. So from our own background as entrepreneurs in the tech industry, it was obvious that there was a need or a demand for somebody within the region, boots on the ground, to come up and to build out a network that was reliable and people wanted to use. And I suppose we opted for a pay to charge from day dot. I suppose in our time, we've also been able to launch our first site in the Republic of Ireland. And all of our FOBs work across Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland all of our billing and all the VAT rates and stuff. We've been able to get those in place. I suppose again, you'll probably see more of those sites across the island as well, not just Northern Ireland, over the coming number of years.
I hadn't even realised you'd gone into the Republic of Ireland as well. So there we go. It's almost kind of a yin and yang thing that EasyGo and Weev have done in terms of the kind of nature of the expansion of the business. That's pretty cool. But no, interesting to hear as well the interoperability hasn't been too much of a headache, similarly with billing. So one can only hope that any issues at ESB can be resolved promptly. And failing that, it sounds like EasyGo and Weev's AppDev's consultancy services may be available. But in terms of actually introducing charging tariffs to begin with, that obviously wasn't something that ESB was even able to do, because for a long time in Northern Ireland, it was illegal to charge due to the regulations around public vending of electricity. So I don't know if this is something that Jody you'd be able to comment on, or if it's more John from DFI. But are you able to provide some more insight into what exactly that legislation was, why it came to be, and how it was resolved?
So that was previously a direction that was called the maximum resale price. So that set the maximum price that a customer should be expected to pay for electricity that was provided by an authorized supplier. So for example, if you were in rented accommodation or in a caravan park, then you would have been expected that price to be passed through. Now, back in pre-lockdown, so this would have been in March 2020, we actually went out and consulted on changing that and creating an exception for EV operators or charge point operators, so that they now can be able to put on a range of other costs on top of that electricity that's supplied to them. So that'll enable them to recover, charges levied to the charge point users. So it's not just limited now to pass through costs, but also to costs associated with infrastructure, ongoing maintenance, operational costs associated with the infrastructure overheads. Though it must be clear that whenever prices do come in, customers need to be able to see that separation between the electricity cost and the cost of the other items that are making up the prices that they'll be charged. So there needs to be clear transparency in that total cost of charging, rather than transparency in the cost of electricity. So that's key for any future charges that's coming along.
You raise a good point, because there are some unique additional kind of economic considerations when it comes to building charging infrastructure in Northern Ireland in the first place. And it's certainly something I'd like to cover next. But before we do, we'll quickly flash up the second poll of the morning. So what's the most common issue that you encounter when you're using a public charge point in Northern Ireland? Has it generally been trouble-free? Are they often out of service? Is there hogging of DC chargers to 100%, including vehicles that are fully charged? Any issues with RFID, kind of a communication sort of issue, if you wish, with the charger? Billing is probably not going to be too much of an issue in Northern Ireland, given that ESB is still free to use, but that'll be an interesting one based on ChargePlace Scotland. When the charging tariffs started coming in, there were a couple of billing issues there. And of course, icing. The blocking of a charge point by an internal combustion engine vehicle. So we've got a few answers on that one. I'll let that run for a few more seconds before publishing the results, but they are quite telling, and they are probably easily resolved by the introduction of those charging tariffs. So I'll wait 5 more seconds just to give you any kind of latecomers a chance. Right, here we go. So these are the results, and funnily enough, it's a charge point out of service, possibly because it's an older one that hasn't been replaced as part of the sweeping reforms that John just mentioned there, the sweeping upgrades, but also the hogging of DC chargers to 100%, which is something that overstay penalties will resolve instantly. And it's good to hear that those are being introduced / have been introduced. That's a good point, actually. Chris and Thomas, presumably you've got overstays on your rapid charging estate.
Yeah, we do indeed.
Yeah. Good stuff. Yeah, just double checking, because that is such a no-brainer. We've seen that with ChargePlace Scotland. The ones that don't get overstays are the ones that get abused, and the ones that do are the ones where everyone behaves themselves. So yeah, interesting stuff. But in terms of the cost of charging in Northern Ireland, of course, you know, the CPO, the charge point operator, has to recoup the costs that are associated with not just running the network, but actually building it in the first place. And there's a couple of unusual quirks that happen in Northern Ireland. And one of them is that if you look closely at a type 2 charge point, you know, your kind of fast charge point, it might look like a conventional one that you'd find in mainland Britain, where it's just a kind of, you know, ground mounted kind of monolith, if you wish. But actually, chances are it's a wall-mounted unit that's been put onto a special pedestal that has a meter cabinet inside it. And I believe that that's due to unique legislation to Northern Ireland about each charge point having to have its own separate metering. So something like, even if it was on the side of a public building, it would still need its own separate metering. Is that correct? Again, would that be one for yourself, Jody, to cover? Or would it be NIE Networks on that one? Would it be Chris Maguire?
Will there be various legislation? You have ESQCR, which is electricity safety and continuity regulations, and that's where you need permission from NIE. We also have NIE as the meter service provider, which is slightly different than over in GB, where suppliers provide a lot of the meters. Here it's NIE. So whenever you're engaging with NIE's network, it has to be done through a meter.
That's interesting. So what has caused that legislation to be so different from Scotland, England, and Wales, where it's, as I say, there seems to be far less of a concern about having a physically separate meter?
It's, well, here's slightly different in the sense that NIE, we only have one DNO here. Now we have multiple suppliers, yet because we have one DNO and given our size, it's easier for NIE to be the meter service provider.
Interesting feedback on that one. I'm sure that Mark will have some interesting thoughts on that one too, from the oodles of experience you've got trying to kind of gather the interesting kind of quirks of this network. But there is another very important and very expensive difference when it comes to installing a charging hub in Northern Ireland. And what I'll do is I'll very quickly share my screen to illustrate this, because this is something that was highlighted in a recent report by eSmart Networks. So let me just show you on the screen just now. And this should be it here. Yep, should be able to see this. So here is a typical example of, say, a 2 MVA. So, you know, basically an EV charging hub. So you're wanting to have a new charging hub installed in Northern Ireland. You compare that to the cost of mainland UK, and yeah, you've got the cost of the primary station, a substation upgrade, which is a couple of million, and then you've got $1 million to add on to the cost of the kind of high voltage network. And then you look at the cost. So the first row here is what you would pay in Northern Ireland. Second row is what you would currently pay in Great Britain. And then the third row is what the consumer, the charge point network would pay from March 2023. Now, the reason for this is that if you look at the middle row, the GB current regulations, what you have is a cost that is considerably socialized. So instead of paying the full 2 million for the cost of the new primary station, substation upgrade, you're paying the percentage that you're actually going to use of that substation, which in this case, out of the kind of 20 MVA upgrade, you only need 2 MVA of it. So you divide that through, and you get those sort of figures. And then you look at the cost of the 11 kilovolt network upgrades to the customer. Again, you're not going to be using all of it, so you kind of work it out accordingly. Yes, you will pay for the dedicated connection from the new kind of, well, to the new customer substation, if you wish. So that kind of 500 meter cable run is giving there. That's the same, but nonetheless, you're looking at less than a third of the price versus what you have to pay in Northern Ireland. And then with these new regulations coming in Great Britain, soon the cost of the substation upgrade will not be applicable to the customer whatsoever. Similarly with the high voltage network upgrade. So it's purely the cable run. And that's been done because obviously within the kind of GB setup, there's an awareness that we need to decarbonize transport, we need to decarbonize heating, and we need to do this in a way that is affordable as possible and can be done as quickly as possible. But at the moment in Northern Ireland, if you are a charge point operator and you're looking to, say you are EasyGo or Weev, and you're looking to build a charging hub, you're having to pay for an entire new substation that you don't even need the full capacity of. So just because you're the first mover, you've been whacked with the entire bill. So I'd like to bring in NIE Networks on this one. Chris, what is the rationale? What's the reason why the first mover has to pay the full brunt of the connection cost rather than the owner of that, presumably NIE Networks, gradually recouping the costs as more people inevitably connect to that substation?
So each jurisdiction has its own charging principles that's applied to how the DNO issues a cost for any reinforcement works, and again how that's recovered. And in Northern Ireland, then the mechanism is that the connecting customer will be charged for new assets along with the reinforcement associated with the voltage that they are connected onto and 1 voltage above. And as you can see just from that slide, there's a different approach in GB, which obviously results in a different outcome cost, in terms of the connection in that sort of scenario that was given.
Certainly is. There's, as I say, is a substantial difference. And one thing that's become apparent as well, sadly, Leo from DFE couldn't join us today, but Department for Economy has confirmed that there is a Barnett consequential for the new GB regulations, which are chucking tens of millions of pounds at the cost of basically the sort of high voltage network and substation upgrades to get charging and basically high power charging hubs along trunk roads. That Barnett consequential will be paid to Northern Ireland, but apparently has not been ring fenced and is just therefore lost in general revenue for Stormont. So it's a shame that Leo isn't here, because I was going to say, are there any plans to try and claw some of that ring fencing of that funding so that it can be used to try and reduce this fairly brutal cost? John from DFI, I don't know if this is something you've been privy to in any discussions at all. Do you know if that's something that is currently being worked on?
Hi everybody. No, actually, I'm not well or best placed at all to comment on that. I mean, any Barnett consequentials, any monies that come back in, I mean, that's obviously a political issue, so it's nothing for the department to comment on.
No worries at all. It was just on the off chance that might have been the case. As I say, Leo would have been the perfect man to chat with about that. But interestingly, there is the new EV task force that has been created. Again, I'll quickly share my screen because there are some important milestones or deliverables that they have set out. So let me just share my screen with you just now. 2 seconds. Should be able to see that. So yeah, this is the game plan for the EV action plan. So actually, there's, again, the first one's being led by DFE, so that's a shame that Leo's not here. But future-proofing electrical capacity at key strategic sites along key transport corridors. So there's the talk about basically the increased provision of this, initially with a report to identify where it needs to be, and then the implementation of the phase 1 of that report. So we'll get NIE Networks in to comment on that in just a second. But the sort of going back to the connection cost side of things, the second point, which is to be completed by the end of next year, is to review the connection cost structure and try and make that more appealing so that we can get more charge point operators like Weev and EasyGo entering the market. So that's being led by the utility regulator, as you can see there. Jody, are you able to provide any more information at this stage of how those connection costs are being reviewed and what may be the likely outcome of the new kind of structuring for connection costs for the likes of a multi-MVA charging hub?
So first of all, we'll be going out and issuing a call for evidence in the new year, asking about connection policy within Northern Ireland. Should it change, what will be the cost and benefits to the Northern Ireland consumer? As from your previous slide, you can see that the costs are on par across different jurisdictions. What's different is the allocation of what the connectee pays for in terms of reinforcement and what other customers are being paid for. Now, given these tough times, the level of fuel poverty in Northern Ireland, we will need to see clear evidence of the cost and benefits if we were even to consider increasing costs to Northern Ireland consumers. So that's what these call for evidence will be doing. It'll be going out and asking questions about connection policy. Just to point out, one of the other things that GB is bringing in is a requirement for a high cost cap in terms of connections. So they have set a high cost cap for demand connections, which is set at £1,720 per kVA, and for generation connections they have set a high cost cap at £200 per kilovolts. One of the questions we could be asking is, would something similar work here in Northern Ireland, and at what level? So we're kind of opening up some questions about what happened here, what's happening in GB, what's happening in ROI, should we change it, and what is the cost and benefits to Northern Ireland consumer?
Excellent. I'm glad that that's being asked, because it, as well as we know, it's frightfully expensive at the moment. And on that note, actually, I just want to bring in Thomas first, and then Chris Kelly from EasyGo. But Thomas from Weev, obviously you both of your companies have installed hardware in Northern Ireland and in the Republic of Ireland. Have you noticed a gulf in or any sort of difference in grid connection costs, and which has generally been the more affordable? And have there been any grid connection costs that have prohibited you from installing sites that you were hoping to install? We'll start with Thomas.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks. I suppose we've been working closely with NAE Networks. I have to say that our team has been working closely with the guys on the sites that we're bringing up. Certainly in the early days, it's finding capacity potentially already in the network that the customers or landlord supply or power purchase agreements that we've been working with. Again, when it comes to the future and what we want, I think what Jody's describing there, again, I need to look further into detail. It sounds something that's sensible. As CPOs, you want predictability. You want to know that if you're going to a site and you're looking for a certain level of kVA, either it's subsidized or there is a cap involved, where you can assess sites at mass and wide quickly, that you can make decisions, whereby the process at the moment is apply for a quotation, wait the 90 days in a lot of cases, and then only at that point you know whether or not you can actually do something or not. So there's a lot of not just money but time wasted as well. And if we're looking at a connection review ending in January 2020 or the end of 2023, we're only getting a review at that stage before we can start to implement new procedures or start to align ourselves with the UK. And again, this is all about timing and again slowing down the rollout of networks across Northern Ireland. Again, the Republic of Ireland, I wouldn't be able to comment just yet. Again, we're early days into that. I suppose the main point for ourselves, the Republic of Ireland to date, has been getting the tech to work, getting the apps and the RFID and the billing and the VAT rate. Some of the challenges, I suppose, ESB and ecars have been describing the other way as getting up here. So definitely in the south of Ireland, I wouldn't comment just yet. But in Northern Ireland, there's definitely a lot of work and a lot of time that is still going to be, say, wasted, but certainly elapsed between now and getting to a solution that allows scale, predictability, rollout at the pace that the province requires.
You've actually raised another very important point before we come on to Chris, and that is the time taken for grid application requests and so on. Now, Mark, of course, you're part of the EV task force, and you've obviously you are a font of knowledge on all things EV in Northern Ireland, so you're a powerful asset for their team. And I believe that one of the outcomes of the EV task force was trying to reduce the time taken to apply for grid connections and also increase the transparency of available capacity at various sites. Is that correct? I think you've got some more details on that.
Yes, Euan. So I think one of the issues in Northern Ireland obviously is around the poor sort of capacity on our network here. I think eSmart pointed out that 54% of substations have 3 to 5 MVA capacity or less. So in terms of the general grid in Northern Ireland, spare capacity is definitely low. So what can we do about that? Well, let's have a look at where there is capacity. And I know Chris and the team are working on a more granular sort of map that will enable CPOs to look in with more detail and try and identify sites where we can spend less money, maybe 30,000 on a substation instead of 300,000 or whatever it is. But some, it mightn't be the A location, but it might be around the corner from the A location. That seems to us like a good place to start to try and get some sites in. Going back a bit to the ESB news that John's given us this morning about the end of Q4 next year, I'll have to say that we're really disappointed that ESB has passed 2 deadlines now. They told us in October last year that they would turn around and pay the charge in the first half of this year, and then they told the task force, as you pointed out in the document, that it would be by the end of this year. So this is now the 3rd deadline. The worry always is that will we make this deadline? It's such an important issue, and it's really doing ESB reputational damage at this point in the north. The way that our members are being treated up here, it's holding back things massively here, and it's very disappointing.
Before bringing Chris in, I think that's an entirely valid point. I'll give John a quick chance to come back on that.
I accept the point around the charging and the etiquettes that's built up, Euan. Like we've a team working on this. It's not as easy for us to do given the legacy that's there and the nigh on 100,000 customers affected by the move. I don't agree with Mark that it is holding back investment in Northern Ireland. I think there are other CPOs making investment in Northern Ireland. I think for us, the largest consideration is the issue that we've just spent 10 minutes talking about, which is the price to connect decent sized hubs to the electrical grid in Northern Ireland. All of the entities that are on this call today, from a commercial perspective, have to, they rely on a margin to make their profit. And that is seriously eroded by the costs of infrastructure that has to be provided up there. I think it was Tomas made the point as well that there is a real reluctance on the part of people to sign leases with landlords and third parties unless you know approximately how much you think the network or grid connection is going to be. So we've had many cases where you would reach a successful sort of commercial negotiation with a third party landowner for the placement of a hub on their parties. But the sums involved in trying to provide electrical connection at that site just make it completely uncommercially viable. So I take the point, and I do can reassure everyone on the call we're working hard to get this over the line. It is a slip of about 12, 14 weeks. As I said, I was in Israel last week to sort of speed up the process, as it were. I think we've sort of achieved in doing that. But I don't think, and I don't fully share that this is the only reason why there isn't investment in Northern Ireland.
Don't think it's the only reason, but I certainly think it's a major reason. And we do get charge point operators talking to the association about this. We had a call a few weeks ago where one charge point operator had a charger in a city, and he said his chargers were not in use, but the free ESB chargers across the road were in constant use. And his comment to us was, why would I spend more money continuing to roll out chargers in that scenario? So I guess that's really the point that we're making. We've been talking to ESB. I think John was probably talked to 2 of your predecessors now, going back to 2017. And at the first meeting in 2017, we did discuss turning on to pay to charge here. So I think, it's hard to see how this wasn't better prepared for. It's an inevitable transition. It just seems to be going on too long. But look, let's hope that this latest deadline is the one we're going to see met.
Just to make a final point on it, Euan, that we didn't own the networks until the start of this year, so we weren't in a position to introduce pricing on someone else's networks. So
actually, that's you raise a good point. So ESB ecars ESB used to be somewhat related to NIE networks, didn't it, before it was spun out? Is that correct? Or what was the kind of relationship between the DNO and the charging network?
We get asked this a lot, actually. The ESB cars is treated the same way by NIE networks, by ESB networks. They're a DSO or DNO, depending on the utility, the same as WPD over in GP in Birmingham, wherever you are. You get quoted for the amount of power you're looking for. Depending on the jurisdiction you're in, there's a different degree of socialization in ROI. It's all socialized. So you can, as I said, conduct a commercial negotiation with someone relatively assured in how much that connection is going to cost. GB, there's an element of socialisation that will change from the 1st of April, as the slide you threw up earlier alludes to. But in Northern Ireland, there's that degree of uncertainty yet.
Interesting to know. I think that's, yeah, before we actually, there's a couple of other kind of interesting relationships to explore on that one, but I'm aware, acutely aware that Chris has been waiting very patiently, Chris Kelly, to answer the question about sort of Northern Ireland versus Republic of Ireland grid connection costs. Has there been a considerable difference? Has it hampered, or have you had sites that you've just had to abandon because of grid connection costs in ROI or NI, and why?
Yeah, thanks for the reminder there, Euan. I'd actually forgotten what the question was.
Sorry about that.
But yeah, there's a significant difference in grid costs. But I think the most challenging part is finding where the power is, and finding out exactly where it is, because where it might be ideal for a charge point may not be ideal for power. And we found that with various DC sites that we've explored. You know, we've had to move one location in a town 6 times for various reasons. There were council reasons, there were power reasons, but and that was just on the planning stage. So there's a lot of joined up thinking to be done among the various parties to be able to say, yes, here is a good place to put a charge point. You know, right at the very start, where it was mentioned by Neil about the different factors to take into consideration about where to put the charge point from a safety perspective, from a user perspective, from something to do, from availability 24 hours a day. They're the starting points. We really need to start mapping out where the power is as well, to allow CPOs to actually quickly jump on and make an application. We actually have a debate inside among the engineers who are dealing with Northern Ireland and the engineers who are dealing with the South. So there's 2 points. One, in Northern Ireland, we can actually make the application for free. And with the application being made, we just go through due process on a site for 90 days. After we've had all the discussions with a site owner about the possibility of a contract. Then we find out if there's enough power there to use it. If not, then we have to move on. But with NIE, it's free to do this for the 90 days. So no, we don't want to be a thorn in NIE's side and make applications for 10,000 sites and have them review all 10,000 sites for us and come back in within 90 days and say, here you go, Chris, we found 200 that are viable out of the amount that you've put in. So we don't want to do that. So we would like to work with NIE on you know, even some guidance around what areas have the best power, what towns have the best power for charge points. Second thing I wanted to mention was in the South. It's a little different in that when we make the application, we have to pay for the application before we can actually find out if there is enough power there for it, and before we can actually find out if the site is suitable. That's become a challenge. We've little over 100 applications in with ESB networks at the minute, and each application goes into the multiples of thousands. So it's a very expensive waiting game as well. So look, there are challenges. There are challenges being brought out because EV charging and high power EV charging is new to the island. But there are challenges that I think everybody needs to step up, address quickly, because all of those challenges are hampering the rollout of charge points.
Definitely. And that's, again, very useful feedback. Thank you. I knew that as soon as you mentioned about, you know, the difference in lead times and so on, I knew I'd read this somewhere. So amidst all of this flurry of paperwork I have, yes, there was the paper from eSmart Networks, who mentioned the timescales to obtain connection offers, and I quote that particularly for connections in the 1 to 2 MVA capacity bracket. So that's, you know, looking at your sort of, you know, high power charging hubs. So a typical timescale for a connection offer for a 1 MVA electric vehicle high power charging hub site in Great Britain is 4 weeks, compared with 3 months in Northern Ireland. So presumably that is being submitted to NIE networks, in which case, Chris Maguire, are you able to divulge on the reason between the difference in the time period and why it's a bit longer quite a bit longer in Northern Ireland than in GB?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few points I would like to pick up on there, and just that we've been chatting around. I suppose the first is around the volume of applications coming in, you know, and the timescales that's mentioned to wait for them. And yes, we do recognise that anyone can submit an application here in Northern Ireland, and we'll do a full study and establish what that exact cost is to connect. We have had some good success with customers who let us know that it is sort of a feasibility assessment that they're looking, and that allows us to maybe not go as in depth, and we can find potential solutions at a much shorter time frame. And to take that one step further, we're working with a developer to produce a digital model that people can utilize to check the network and establish if there is the potential capacity for a connection on that. And we hope to have that rolled out at some stage towards the end of 2023. So again, that would work well for some of the discussion we've had here around identifying potential sites and seeing if they're within the cost bracket for the proposal.
That's a game changer. That just literally being able to kind of go onto the map and go, that one's available, and it'll be an online sort of application process that you can put in the details of the connection that you're looking for, and it'll advise you as to what the type of reinforcement may be there. In addition to that, I suppose that'll allow charge points to be rolled out where the network capacity is available. But I think what's already been touched on is that may not necessarily be where the charging need is for the public. And if we refer back to the first point from the action plan that was set up, there is a commitment there to really review where charging infrastructure is required, and that's very useful for NIE to then explore the reinforcement needs in those specific areas, which then can identify efficient investment, you know, to create that capacity. I suppose it's key for us to understand where that capacity is needed, so we can establish that, as opposed to create capacity across the network, which isn't necessarily feasible to do. So hopefully that speeds things up in terms of timelines. But in the meantime, for charge point operators, I would encourage that taking that feasibility approach and having open discussions around what you're hoping to achieve there, and that can, in some cases, free up our resources to maybe look at additional applications in a shorter time frame. That's really good to know. Okay, and likewise, the fact that you're part of the EV task force in Northern Ireland is very promising. The fact that you're in there with major stakeholders to be able to, as you say, kind of find those areas where you need capacity early on, and also, you know, the fact that you're advertising, or will be advertising, where that capacity is soon via the online function. So things sound like they'll be a lot rosier this time next year. That's great to hear. We do have more questions for you, but there's two people who've been sitting there very patiently: John Starkey from DFI and Ann Artt from Derry and Strabane District Council. And there have been some good questions coming in on the chat as well about the more kind of local authority level and what's happening there. Now, I understand that obviously, Anne, you're leading the on-street residential charge point scheme application across almost all the local authorities in Northern Ireland, aren't you?
Yes, that's correct, Euan. And that's part of the NIEV consortium, which was set up last year. It was set up really for two main reasons: to identify potential funding opportunities, and also really for the councils, a platform for the councils to gain knowledge in this area. And the more we discuss charge points, we see the minefield that it can become. So it's been a great platform for that, to gain knowledge and to bring everything to that forum for discussion. The obvious funding opportunity was the on-street residential charge point scheme, which I think is much better known in GB. They hadn't received any applications from Northern Ireland, so we got our first application in there for the 31st of March this year, and they really welcomed it. And we secured funding for 124 charge points in 9 of the 11 council areas. We have all 11 councils in the consortium, so they're all members of the consortium. This time, a couple of the councils opted not to join the application, but next time around, I think I foresee all 11 councils being part of that application. So yes, I can see there's plenty of CPOs on our webinar today. I'm sure eagerly awaiting the release of our tender for the charge point operator. We did think it would be out by now. It would be out by now, but as I've mentioned, this has been a very enlightening process. We did think it would be out maybe, as I said, sooner than now. But with it being new territory for the consortium and for the councils here in Northern Ireland, with installing so many charge points, ESB and DFI have explained the history of the ecar charge points that was set up really by DFI. So this is a local authority led initiative, and it has to be because only local authorities can apply for this funding opportunity. But yes, we wanted to take our time to really make sure that we're putting out a tender that covers all the potential risks, and we've had a lot to discuss at, in various formats to try to get the tender that we're happy with. So we're hoping that it goes out very soon after Christmas.
Well, there we go. As you say, there's a lot of CPOs in the chat. They'll have been eagerly taking notes on that one. They'll be very excited to hear that. Because, of course, again, I have my Charge Place Scotland mindset on of, oh, yeah, it's local authorities. They'll chuck the charge points on Charge Place Scotland. But no, they need someone to run them as well. So presumably, would it be one CPO that would be running all of them across all the local authorities? Or would the local authorities be able to kind of pick and choose which CPOs and which hardware goes in? Presumably, it would be like a sort of, one...
At this stage, we're procuring for one CPO, and that's based as well on the experience of other councils we've engaged with in GB that see it, that recommend that. We are engaging with other authorities that have much more experience in this area. We're trying to listen to as many parties as we can, including Mark there from the Electric Vehicle Association that has a wide member base there. And knowledge in this area for many years. That has been some of the feedback that we had received from councils throughout GB to procure for one CPO for this initiative and for this fund.
Very wise words indeed. And I mean, for anyone joining this who's looking into doing charging infrastructure elsewhere, then always do your due diligence on the hardware and on the CPO. I mean, obviously, look at the hardware that Thomas is installing, look at the hardware that Chris Kelly's installing and the reasons they're doing that. And similarly, look at the hardware that ESB ecars that John is taking out and replacing, and why is that being taken out? That sort of thing. There's already lots of evidence about what works well and what doesn't. And the worst thing you could do is do an Edinburgh Council and go for the worst case scenario, despite being warned several times. But back on topic. So, Anne, obviously things are a wee bit different for yourselves, because yes, you are the local authorities. Yes, you've banded together, and as local authorities, it's you that has to apply for the on-street residential charge point scheme. But unlike in GB, you don't actually own the streets that they're going to be put on, even though they're within your local authority. Those are the jurisdiction of yourself, John, aren't they? Department for Infrastructure.
Yeah, Euan, maybe I could just give a wee bit of background there as well to the Artt scheme. So
sure.
Yeah, we get our funding from the UK government, really from OZEV. So any UK government funding, I know there's other EU streams, etc., but any UK government funding is from OZEV. And OZEV have different funding, different grant schemes. So in the past, the department has been able to sort of lead a consortium or whatever for the original ASB cars. But this particular scheme was a 75% funding stream with 25% match funding required. And this particular stream was only for local councils, local authorities across the UK, well, England and Northern Ireland. So, as we regularly engage with those, and we've seen this opportunity coming up, and we engaged with them, and it was clear that it had to be from a council-led perspective, not from sort of central government DFI as such. And at that stage, we got in touch with councils, and Derry City and Strabane District Council, fair play them, put their hand up, volunteered, not just to make an application, but to lead a council-led consortium, which in itself is challenging to try and lead a consortium across a number of councils. And I think they've done a fantastic job. From day one, they've come in, They've pulled together the councils, they've made an application, and the department has did its best to support and give any guidance, etc., given our experience in that particular field. And they've made, as Anne has pointed out, they've made the applications, been successful. They've got their funding, and the Department for Infrastructure, previous one of former ministers, also confirmed match funding of 500,000 towards that project, which meant the councils were able to avail of the installation process with 100% funding through UK government and through the department. And so, as Anne said, that application's getting in. There has been, yes, there's a further funding stream for 22-23, and I know Anne and the consortium are considering its position there. So I think there was a bit of confusion at the very outset as to who would make an application for this, but it is a council-led one, and yes, Derry City, Mr. Bond District Council have been doing a fantastic job pulling that together, 124 charge points, and they're working their way through that process to get those out to tender and installed within those timescales.
Yeah. And just to add to that, Euan, yeah, site selection, as everybody touched on, for us, it was the biggest challenge. And having the data, we have to try to, it's as regards gauging where is the demand going to be, where are the charge points going to be needed. We are limited with this scheme as well. It's on street, although they have given us the freedom to install in council-owned car parks as well. So our locations are a mixture of on street and a mixture of council-owned car parks that are in residential areas. And the news from NIE as regards the transparency of knowing where we could potentially place charge points, that is it's welcome news for the consortium as well, because we had heavy involvement with NIE as regards to site selection. It was a very time-consuming process for NIE. They worked really hard with us to get our application in for the 31st of March. There's a couple of couple of Chris's colleagues that it would have taken up so much of their time, the site assessments for the consortium, and to and fro, lots of emails. I've touched base with one of Chris's colleagues to see, is there ways to make it more efficient next time around if we do try to get an application in for the 31st of March, to make it easier for them as well. And a map like that is where councils could maybe consider different locations. Having the data is the big challenge too, like trying to look into the future, where is the demand and the need for charge points going to be? Because we had this was our first application. We would ideally like to have been more strategic that way, and we plan to try to be a bit more strategic the next time as to where is the demand going to be. But that is a challenge, who is thinking of even buying an electric vehicle? And then the restriction of this scheme, it's to benefit residents that don't have driveways. That is the aim of the scheme, that don't have their off-street parking. So as regards what I've seen, it just a question popped up of what's going to happen in Strabane. We are early days. We are starting to look at this alongside DFI as regards where charge points for the future and where they need to be. And so this scheme will benefit Strabane as well. And our next application, which we hope to get in for the 31st of March, obviously this time with match funding from DFI. I'm not sure if that's going to be secured next time around. It might need to be, the match funding might need to be invited from charge point operators. But yeah, we are looking at the council as a whole and all the councils as a whole. But yeah, being as strategic as possible, that's where I see one of our big challenges, to see where the demand for charge points is going to be.
Good point. Yeah, so you also mentioned there the different structures with the councils in England and the council relationship here and with the department. So yeah, it is different. And yes, what we've been doing with Anne is the department has got certain roles in this. So for example, we've got legislation teams, we've got park enforcement teams, and we've also got divisions and section offices where applications need to be made in advance for where you can put a charge point, like any bit of street furniture, or if it's in a particular car park, etc. So we've been working very closely with Anne and the consortium on all those aspects, and the department's working hand in hand with them to make sure we meet any of those challenges.
Now, here's an interesting one, because, of course, it's not just the local authority that's dealing with it. Say that, obviously, there'll be another round of the OZEV grant and so on, and that will hopefully get utilised, and it will add more infrastructure. And that's very much between, the local authority consortium, yourself, Anne, and your team, and, of course, John, your team at DFI. But what if a commercial CPO comes along and says, I have a 100% funded charge point model, there are potentially some local residents nearby who are interested in having this hardware installed near them, we will cover all of the costs. We just need permission to install charging infrastructure on your land. So from whom would that CPO need to get permission? Would it be just DFI? Would the local authority have to have a veto on that potentially? What would the situation be there? And there's a follow-on question from that, which is, what if a local resident wants to fully fund some sort of on-street charging solution themselves? For example, 3 that come to mind are the gully, which is the Oxford City Council's using those. It's like a tiny little channel that gets dug into the pavement, and it's slip proof and so on, but you basically lay your charging cable across it, and it means that you can run from a wall box on the front of your house to your car without creating a trip hazard. Then there's the NODAM charging arm that looks a bit like a drainage downpipe on the front of the house that extends up high across the pavement. To be honest, that shouldn't be an issue because it's not needing anything dug up on DFI or local authority land. But the third one is, if there's an on-street charge point, like I believe that Trojan Energy, they have like the ground-mounted socket, that one could potentially be wired directly to someone's house. So again, it's not like a public piece of infrastructure; it's a private piece of infrastructure, in effect, on DFI land. Although there could be potentially some way of ensuring that it's guaranteed to be maintained. But the point is, if we start with a more conventional, like Type 2 post from a CPO that's 100% funding that, what would the hurdles be? Would DFI get involved? Would local authorities get involved? How would they go about that? And then we'll come back to the sort of the DIY, kind of households wanting to fund their own thing themselves. So if we start with the CPOs, what would the deal be?
Ian, maybe if you're happy, I'll take that question about the last 3, the gully, etc., and the swinging arm and that, and what the position is regarding that there. So you're talking mostly that's on street, and it's very simple. Anybody that wants to do any process on street, whatever piece of street furniture that might be, they would make an application to the local division within the department. They would set out what they're wanting to do, and then the division would consider, based on where that is and what it involves, whether that would be an opportunity that could be explored or not. The other thing about that as well is there may well be other things that the local council might have to consider there as well, like planning permission, etc. But there is no prescriptive, it can be done or it can't be done at this point in time. It would have to be an application that could be made to the local section office for that.
Mark has a question on that point for you.
Yeah, so we met with Gully, the Oxfordshire City Council, Euan, along with representatives from DFI, and I don't think what John's saying is really 100% correct there. We've had lots of members try and apply to DFI to get a drop curb, to get up into the front of a terrace house or to cross the pavement with a cable, and the answer is always no. So we've been talking to DFI and asking them to start a gully-style trial. We've talked to several local authorities who are willing to do that. And I just think we need the ambition there to move that forward. The last paragraph, I think, of the action plan in the EV task force mentions 60% of Belfast doesn't have off-street parking and other similar urban areas, and that's the next thing to be looked at. But just a few months ago, a lady contacted us. Her lease was up in her car. She wanted to get an EV, and she couldn't get an EV because she couldn't charge at home. So it's an important thing. I think hopefully DFI can get something launched there fairly quickly so that we can at least start a trial and try and get some legislation and get that moving forward.
Well, Euan, just to avoid any confusion and to be 100% clear in this, what I've told you is 100% accurate. Anyone want to make an application, any private owner, anybody want to make an application on street, they apply to their local division stroke section office. Anybody that has been done so far, those applications have been considered. So I'm 100% clear. That is exactly the position at this point in time. Talking about the gully situation, well, we're talking about the gully situation. Gully have done our introduced pilot scheme somewhere in England. And I know Mark met with my line manager in the department about running a pilot scheme. And that was considered, and my manager has spoken to Mark about that itself. So anybody wants to put something on street, any of those mechanisms that you've mentioned, that's how you go about it. It's a piece of street furniture. The department will look at it. and that's what's been done so far.
To our knowledge, there is no application that's been successful. So, you know, it's one thing to say you can apply, but if you can apply and the answer is always no, then we would question how useful that is. I think there needs to be a change there.
It would definitely be good to get feedback on why particular solutions are rejected, if they are rejected, and similarly why ones that are approved, so that it basically would avoid any kind of repeated efforts of not hitting against a brick wall, because that's implying that nobody's listening. But obviously, if there's a particular technology that is not suitable for Northern Irish local authorities or for DFI, it would be very useful to have that sort of feedback available, easily read online, because it could be that someone has something that's very similar to a gully, which either resolves that issue or is worse. For example, the other day, I nearly kind of slipped and decked it on a piece of metal, a cover for something that was lying across the pavement that had obviously been given planning permission to be put in. But you compare that to a gully that has like one of these proper high friction non-slip surfaces on it and is a fraction of the thickness of this thing that got planning permission. You know, it's quite something that other thing, whatever it was, had got planning permission, but you know, a gully might struggle in comparison. So just
to be clear, your planning permission is the ownership of the local councils, not the department. The department is the policy for planning, but planning applications are local council.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. My bad. But I mean, same kind of point applies with local authorities as well, if they can have that information to hand. And I don't know if that's something you're able to collate or feedback to the consortium. But
I just know through the consortium meetings that some councils have been approached by CPOs. And discussions were ongoing, you know, as to, you know, they seemed very open. You know, maybe there's potential business model that councils are considering too, and concession models with CPOs. But I think councils are open to those proposals from CPOs. I'm aware, I can think of one where meetings seem to be ongoing and consideration was taken for fully funded models that were, you know, charge points that are fully funded by charge point operators.
Good to hear. Very promising. So basically, in summary, there is on-street charging infrastructure coming to Northern Ireland soon, and it sounds like there potentially could be even more. We now know the avenues to go down if you are a CPO or if you're a householder trying to install your own infrastructure. So that's quite promising. But yeah, it would be great if there was a way that this was this information about what's acceptable and what's not was readily available online, ideally from a central point rather than individual local authorities. But if needs must, if there's differences in sort of approaches taken by the different LAs, then so be it. But actually, speaking of different approaches, going back to the kind of national level of things with, the grid level of things, I should say, one sort of glaring absence almost from Northern Ireland that I've just become aware of is that there doesn't seem to be an option for an independent DNO, distribution network operator, to come in and say, okay, you want to install this charging hub, well, we will put in the cables for you, we can put in the substations for you, and then all we need is for the official DNO, NIE networks, to do the final little bit. And it could be more expensive but faster, or it could be cheaper. It could be, you know, there are various advantages for using IDNOs in theory, and there are plenty of people in GB who do that. So I presume this would be one for Jody as the utility regulator. What's the situation in Northern Ireland with IDNOs not being, unless I'm mistaken, permitted at present? And are there any plans to change that? And if not, what's the blocker to that?
Legislation, our 1992 electricity order, Article 10 is the one that dictates that you have to be licensed. So you either require a license to generate, distribute, supply, transmit electricity, because if you don't have a license, you're either then license exempt, and then you fall into the class exemptions regulations. Now, in terms of opening up competition and connections, we have been engaging with NIE, and NIE have done a lot of work in terms of independent connection providers, or ICPs. So they've opened up competition in certain aspects of competition of connections. And if you go onto NIE's website, you can actually see there's an ICP portal which enables them for further information in terms of contestability. Chris may want to jump in there.
Yeah, so in terms of independent connection providers, we're working with them, and whenever we would issue a connection offer, it will outline what part of it, which is normally the final connection to the network, must be completed by NIE, but the remainder of it, of new assets, is typically open to ICPs going ahead and installing that. So there's an opportunity for the connecting customer to get costs on that and make a decision as to how they want to progress. It doesn't have to be with NIE.
Good to know. Excellent. Right. So there is some
also
variety.
one thing you own,
Yeah.
if a like any person can apply for a distribution license, but I'm sure NIE would be able to say that the license conditions in terms of a distribution operator is quite onerous, and if you are part of the license, you would have to comply with all those license conditions.
Fair play. I mean, I can tell you now, there's definitely IDNOs operating in GB who would be keen to get into Northern Ireland. I reckon they'd be quite happy to comply with those regs. Obviously, the main bottleneck remains the lack of socialization of substation costs, etc., which does spring to mind one possibility. I don't know if this has been mooted before, but working within the current legislation of, okay, you've basically just had to pay for a 20 MVA transformer and all of these high 11 kV cables and so on, even though you're only going to use about 1/10 of it. Would the utility regulator / NIE networks be open to the idea of a finance company funding all of this, and then anyone who subsequently connects to it pays their share of it plus interest, as a way of effectively socializing it via the private sector, via the finance sector, to make it that bit more workable? It would effectively be a long-term return on investment. So those interest costs would probably be a wee bit higher than you'd like, but still just about doable. Is that something that's been mooted before? Is that something that would be vetoed either by NIE networks or the utility regulator? Just an idea that sprung to mind there.
Well, we are, how do you say, creatures of statute, so we have to work within the legislation and the regulations that are in place. We do have connection regulations in terms of rebates within Northern Ireland. If we were to deviate away from one of them, those regulations would need to be reviewed and either updated. So there's a legislation aspect that what we have to work in terms of our statute. We are quite limited in what we can do. So to be able to move or open that up, you would need to publicly consult from a legislation point of view of changes to those regulations.
Would that be purely civil servants, or would that be Stormont, the Northern Irish Assembly getting directly involved in that one?
That would be the departments, because those regulations would fall under the department.
Fair play. So presumably, well, DFE to an extent, but DFI, presumably, would that be a fair one to say?
I think it's mainly DFE.
If only Leo was here. Such a shame. Such a shame. But oh well, not to worry. I'm sure Leo will be watching this back later on. Food for thought anyway, because there's whispers within GB of utilisation linked loans that have been proposed by the Green Finance Institute. They're actually looking for trial partners. So, if you are a CPO and you are going for a site that's potentially got, say, very kind of summery tourist traffic and then very little in the winter, then you'd only pay back your loan on that infrastructure over the months that is actually being used quite heavily. And then in later months, you'd have reduced payments or no payments. I'm just wondering if, given that kind of level of next level financial thinking, if there was a way that something like that could be done as an interim solution in Northern Ireland, with the for people, basically saving people having to pay for an upgrade to a substantial chunk of the grid when they only need a small bit of it. But yeah, definitely there's a consultation in order there, I reckon. So Leo, if you're watching, please do please do something, because I'm pretty sure that certainly Thomas and Chris there would be very pleased to have that sort of resolved fairly promptly. So yeah, I mean, that's obviously we've covered a heck of a lot. There was one last thing that came to mind, actually. Oh, sorry, a couple of last things that came to mind. One of them goes back to the EV action plan, and it was more just a kind of a point that came to mind when I was reading through it from a kind of fresh perspective. So quite rightly, it's highlighted here. If everyone can see the screen, okay, yeah. It's highlighted here that there's a need to reduce the amount of travel in the first place, substitute travel for example, online shopping, and then to shift modes. And obviously, when you look at the transport hierarchy, the personal motor vehicle is the lowest possible. So yes, Northern Ireland is investing heavily in public transport, for example. So am I right in saying that, for example, DFI has chucked, I think it was about 10 million into charging infrastructure for electric buses? Is that right? We can discuss that in a minute. But anyway, one thing that I noticed is that, of course, when it comes to shifting modes and reducing travel in the first place, online shopping inherently means that you're going to have electric goods vehicle or goods vehicles in general, and it's important to shift those vehicles to electric. So there does need to be that charging infrastructure out and about. Similarly, when you're shifting modes and you're obviously electrifying those goods vehicles in public transport, it's important to build out that charging infrastructure. So whether it's public or depot, there needs to be that charging infrastructure in place, and there needs to be affordable grid connections. Because if we just switch everything to ICE, we could be doing so much more to reduce carbon emissions and to improve air quality. So hopefully, as thinking goes for the EV action plan in Northern Ireland, that's something that will be acted upon firmly, and there will be infrastructure that is suitable for all vehicles, including personal cars, but obviously trying to do this in such a way that public transport and active travel becomes more appealing. But definitely for those delivery vans that are going to be buzzing about all over the place delivering online shopping, it's important that they are able to economically install charging infrastructure, or that CPOs are able to economically install charging infrastructure for them. That was just a bit of food for thought that I had on that one. I hope that that's been factored in the wider action plan. And there was another one as well, actually, that came to mind when I was looking at this. But oh no, sorry, we covered it. Yeah, that's fine. It was the oh, actually no, hang on, that was it. It was the EV charging at park and ride sites. That was, I knew there was something else. So yeah, EV charging at park and rides. This is quite an interesting one, because if you look at what's happened in Scotland, that was generally where some of the first Charge Place Scotland sites were installed, because they were near trunk roads. They were owned by local authorities, and it was quite easy to get access to that land to install that charging infrastructure. But of course, John, in Northern Ireland, it's Department for Infrastructure that owns those park and rides, isn't it? Hence being the project lead in that part of the EV action plan.
Yeah, Euan, the department owns it doesn't own all of them. Some, I think, there might be some that are owned by TransLink. So yeah, quite a few are owned by the department. And so yeah, we're taking the lead on that park and ride action. And I suppose maybe just for general consumption, what I would say is the task force we're trying to arrange a meeting at the minute, as anybody around the table here that's part of that will know. We're hoping to get the next meeting before Christmas, but I'm sure all the different actions will be discussed at how to make the next step forward. And as you can see in the park and ride one, it's to, as soon as we can get up and running, is to get a team working on getting a feasibility study done, as anybody and all the CPOs will know, and the guys from NIE, etc. It's working out what can and can't be done in the respective park and rides. It's not meant to be a charge point system that's going to be run and operated by the department. The department and the teams that we work on are very policy focused. So again, it's getting a feasibility study, looking at all of those, seeing what can be done in each respective park and ride. And yes, just to answer your earlier question, that EV infrastructure task force did look at everything that it did and all the actions in light of the department's sustainable transport pyramid there. So yeah, we'll be running them. We hope to get a meeting before Christmas to get looking at all the different actions.
Excellent. In terms of definitive well, definitive actions over the next sort of 12 months within the EV action plan for DFI and out with the action plan for DFI, which are related to electric vehicles and charging infrastructure. What would you say, in a nutshell, are the definitive actions that will be taken in the next 12 months by the department?
Well, the department will be, honouring any of the actions that you can see in its role, any of the 6 actions that's there. But I suppose what I would say is, and one of the keys to this is, I mean, these are the major stakeholders representation from right across, Northern Ireland. And the key is that we all work together, that we all pull together, that we all support each other and getting there, that the representation in that task force is representative of everybody that has a major role in it. And I think that's one of the most important things for me coming out of the action plan, is that all those key stakeholders work together, pull together, and make sure we can transition to the place we want to be in as quickly as possible.
Sounds good to me. Excellent. Thank you very much. And before we head to Q&A, because there's plenty of questions that have come through, I suppose the last question from me will, is actually one that has been asked in the chat already. It refers to high power charging infrastructure. So yesterday we had the exciting news that McCall have just switched on Northern Ireland's first high-power EV charging hub, if you ignore the Tesla one at Belfast from a couple of weeks ago. But in terms of one that's universally compatible with all EVs, that first site has gone live, and that, of course, has been a long time coming. Was that you, Anne, replaying a video? But that's right. But obviously we have Weev, and we have EasyGo, and we have ESB here. So in that order, what are your plans for high power charging infrastructure, or what are your actions for high power charging infrastructure in Northern Ireland? What are we going to see and when? Thomas first.
I'd like to congratulate McCall on the second multiple DC location in Northern Ireland, actually.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, the 250s you put in. Yeah. Oh, no, hang on, were they 50 or were they 75?
250s, yeah. 250.
Oh, no, fair point.
So,
yeah.
No, it was a very, very nice site the guys have put together. So congratulations on that. It's great to see. Yeah, we have another DC site just off the West Link coming online for this year, and 150 kilowatt sites coming on again, hopefully January of next year. We have a lot of customers in contract now, rolling out into the first half of next year. As I said, the team are out acquiring new sites, going through the process with Chris and his team, getting the connectivity in place, and getting all of the contracts in place with customers. So yeah, it's going to be a big few years for Weev ahead, as we sort of roll out our plans, as we announced in the middle of the year, for 1,500 charge points across Northern Ireland. Again, as I alluded to earlier, we've also now expanded that ambition, and we'll be rolling out into the south of Ireland as well, in addition to the original plans that we've announced. So yeah, it's a busy time ahead for us. Really excited. It's been I suppose it's a real good platform here today with all the key stakeholders in the industry. As we can see, it's not going to be easy. But again, you did mention the homegrown piece earlier. Again, being sort of homegrown, boots on the ground, knowing the councils, the different personalities, the stakeholders. We've been able to get a good start to the network and get it moving, get all the tech working. Again, the big thing for us was making sure that some of the issues we've seen before with other networks, that we didn't repeat those. So again, the choice of hardware, the customer service plan that sits in behind that, the 24/7 help desk, the choice of payment methods that we offer across each of our charge points, the integrations that we're doing at the moment with other apps and applications to make it easier for customers to find and to use our chargers. Again, that's been a real focus for us in the 2022, 2023 and beyond, is about scale and growth.
Amazing. So I didn't realize that there was going to be high power sites from Weev coming so soon. It's almost as if we've been waiting years and years and years for this, and all of a sudden there's just been the floodgates have opened to an extent. But that said, of course, because of grid connection costs, it's still a comparative trickle versus what's happening in Scotland and well, Great Britain in general. But it's very, very promising to see this happening. So Chris, tell us more about EasyGo in terms of high power charging greater than 50. When's that coming on your network in Northern Ireland?
Yeah, same as that. We're exploring some sites at the moment, and we're looking at multiples of 150s if possible. Again, it's grid connection. It's about having power available. That's and affordable power available. That's the key thing. And we're looking at that in an all island approach as well. For the moment, we're still plowing ahead with putting 50s and 75s in locations, because it's obviously it's easier and cheaper to have power there, and make that available. But yeah, absolutely, we've big plans for charging hubs and for multiple sites with 150s around the island. You know, one key thing there, some of the questions that were coming up, a key thing was on payment. All of our fast charge points will have been and will be coming with credit card terminals with them, because you know it's nice to have the network. It's nice to have, I suppose, be a member of the network. We use it really to allow people to find where charge points are. You know, it's free to use the app or download the app to find if the chargers are there and available through all of the major networks on the island. But I think having the credit card payment, then people don't have to actually join up with anybody to start and stop a charge. So yeah, look, they're the key points. You're going to see hubs in 2023 come from us. I'm not at liberty to say at the minute, obviously, but yeah, you will see them.
Interesting to hear. And you're saying obviously that you're still doing 50s at the moment, because obviously, you know, what grid connection can you get your hands on? And it may not be super fast, but it gets you out of trouble, versus you know, an AC charge point for sure. So we can be grateful for that. But that puts me in mind, I'm aware I've been neglecting the polls a little bit, but if we fast forward to poll 5, please, Donal, where are sites with individual 50 kilowatt rapid chargers still fit for purpose? Tick all that apply and be honest. And I'll tell you what, I was genuinely surprised at the similar poll that we ran for EV infrastructure in the Republic of Ireland. I was genuinely surprised at some of the answers for this. So hopefully that's a ticky box thing rather than a single choice answer. Apologies if that format has not come through. I see it differently as a panelist, you see, in comparison to what you will as an attendee. But yeah, hopefully. There we go. Actually, yeah, we're getting quite a lot of yeah, there is a general actually no, there was a general consensus, and now it's becoming far more, oh goodness, it's changing all the time. We'll let you decide amongst yourselves, and we'll very quickly hear from John. High power charging on the ESP ecars network, where and when?
Thanks, Euan. So if you're talking about 100 kilowatt plus, we've 20 locations will go live this year, sorry, 2023. All of that kit is here. Hard to get kit last year because of the global supply chains, etc. Applications are made to NIE networks. So if you're talking about 100 kilowatt chargers, 20 of them will go live at least in 2023. Moving on to hubs, we are at some sort of commercial due to some of the sort of commercial reasons, I can't obviously divulge locations, but we're fairly sure we'll be bringing and starting construction on 5 new high-powered hubs. When in sort of ESB parlance, that's 200 kilowatts and above. So each of those hubs will have a minimum of 3 200s at them, and expect to bring about in a region of 5, depending on the outcome of commercial negotiation. And to the point I think it was Chris made around grid connection, there's 1 or 2 that we, you know, they're borderline viable, but I expect some of them with a fair wind to go through. And then at that point, I think we'll be looking at a fairly major rebuild of our own app mid-year. Work has already started on that. So you'll see pricing come in Q1, the end of Q1, and Q2, then a completely sort of new app with better features. We, as part of our sort of customer survey, which we run and which we are running next week, that feedback goes back into our developers, and we're doing some work with some focus groups with real customers and with other CPOs around Europe and the world, actually trying to get to a sort of a best-in-class, most customer-friendly sort of app, and hopefully that will come on stream. Expectations are June, July of next year also.
Good stuff. Is that
away from the infrastructure, but that's just a build on that.
Yeah. Is that going to be in conjunction with contactless credit card as well? Yeah, payment terminals on the
go over
stuff,
and be like contactless,
nice
mandatory. So we see contactless as a stepping stone. It's a nice to have as another option. So you can be a member. The RFID card is still 80 to 85% of all of our transactions are transacted that way to start and stop, even though the app can do the same thing. Contactless will there, and then park and go ultimately I'd say will be where a lot of us will get to in about four-ish years. Is the duration on that. Obviously Tesla and Tesla Gear are doing that now, but it's a bit more complex when you have a range of manufacturers and a range of OEM car manufacturers or vehicle manufacturers as well.
Interesting feedback from Charlie Reed in the chat. He's just said, don't need cars, just contactless ASAP. Annoyingly, I don't have a poll about that. That would have been interesting to gauge everyone's feedback. But one thing I will say about RFID is that, as well as potentially helping to reduce running costs for CPOs, which would help to reduce tariffs a bit in comparison to pay-ter terminals, which are notoriously pricey and not always reliable. If you look at the likes of what Genie Point has done, Genie Point, I mean, they are a horrifically unreliable network in GB, but one of the things they've got right is that they don't issue RFID cards. They say, take the likes of your Tesco Club card or another RFID card you already have in your, in your wallet anyway, and you can register it at one of their rapid chargers. So you would scan it, it would fail, and then you go on the app and say, oh, that was me, and it would go, okay, so I now know that this club card is actually going to be your RFID card for Genie Point moving on. And then you can just use that. That saves plastic, saves the environment in that sense, and it's just quick and simple, and it means you don't have a wallet full of RFID cards when one can team up to do multiple things. I just thought that was a genius idea. But importantly, we have the results from the poll here, and if we just put these back up, I want to leave the kind of final bit before the Q&A to Mark, of course, the voice of Northern Irish EV drivers. What's our thoughts then on the results of this? I'd say it's more in line with what I was expecting than the Republic of Ireland poll that was saying service stations for people in a hurry, single 50 kilowatt rapid charger. Scotland will tell you firsthand that's probably careful what you wish for. But here we're talking about geographical coverage, and we're talking about supermarkets whilst you're in there for an hour anyway. What's your thoughts, Mark?
Yeah, no, it's not surprising. I think there are still plenty of gaps on the map, on single 50s, while they seem a bit old-fashioned today, are still better than nothing in a lot of areas. So I can understand some of those results, certainly. Are you able to show the graph, maybe graph 2?
Certainly am, yeah.
That I sent earlier.
Click onto that. So yeah, this is the little line chart, isn't it? Hang on, I'll just share my screen now. There we go. Should be able to publish
the quarterly results from the Department for Transport. This is rapid chargers per 100,000 people for a fair comparison. So this wasn't done by us. This was actually done by Oliver from the National Franchise Dealers Association. But it's over time. That's the last 3 years. And by rights, we should all be on an equal footing there, as I say, because it's per 100,000 of population. So that just gives you a little bit of an idea of how far behind we are here and why we're all here today and talking about this. And somebody said to me lately, every day and every month that goes by, for Northern Ireland to recover, the growth is going to have to be that much steeper to catch up. So I think that's a great graph, and it highlights that well. To balance that with some good news, we talked about McCall earlier on. I've just had a look last night, and bear with me, 4 new EasyGo rapid chargers. This is in the last 2 or 3 months. 3 at Little's in Belfast, 1 in Omagh and 1 in Maguire. New privately funded rapid at Basilnight Electrics in Ballymoney, plus the second one due any day now. 3 new Weev rapids at Twin Spires, and a third one due to come online nearby soon as well. 4 Tesla superchargers in the Boucher Road. 6 new rapids at Maxwell Hollywood opened just yesterday. So that's 19 rapid chargers in the last few weeks. And I think the last figures for Northern Ireland where we had 22 in total as of October. So you can see that we're confident as an organisation that there are now 14, I think, on our webpage, charge point operators that are rolling out chargers in Northern Ireland. So things are turning a corner, certainly. On top of those I mentioned, we've got Everrun, the Faster project, obviously, GridServe, Ionity, Instavolt, IPG, SSE, and Tesco Podpoint. So bear with us. I know it's been difficult out there, and as an association, we thought every year, next year's the year, but it really is looking like 2023 is going to make a massive change here.
Wow. That's impressive. I didn't realize it was so many in such a short space of time. I knew that there'd been quite a few that came on recently, but the fact there's even more in the pipeline is very exciting. You did have another couple of quick charts, didn't you? Do you want to have a quick thumb through those, like quick 30-second?
Yes, sure. Yep. So, that's the last quarter's figures for Department for Transport. So that's really a snapshot compared to the previous one over time. And then the next one, we've just taken the figures from another report and divided the number of EVs in Northern Ireland by the number of rapid chargers, just to show 66 vehicles per rapid charger in Scotland versus over 500 trying to get on to a rapid here at the moment. So you can see the problem. But look, as I say, let's hope we turn the corner, and we're going to make serious progress in 2023.
Definitely. And I'll tell you what, the rapid chargers are busy enough in Scotland, where there's 66 EVs per charger. So yeah, look at the slice of the pie that's available to the CPOs in Northern Ireland. It is the grid connection costs that are hampering things, and the sooner those get resolved, the better, I reckon. But yeah, really eye-opening graphs there. I'm glad that you sent those through. But we're now on to questions. I see that Heather Foster had raised her hand. Now, me being the technophobe that I am, Donal, if you're able to bring her in. Because, yeah, actually, really good point. Heather says, if you'd like to join Energy Saving Trust Local Authority EV Discussion Group, then you can email lgsp@est.org.uk. Heather, oh, there we go. Hi, Heather. Good to see you, because obviously you're coordinating local authorities across the UK, basically, when it comes to charging infrastructure, aren't you? So I'll let you say hi and tell us what you're up to.
Hi. So for those that don't know, Energy Savings Trust are funded by the Department for Transport. We provide support in England, but we kind of see it as it doesn't stop in England. The same issues are across the whole of the UK. So we propose with Transport Scotland for next year to host, we basically have an officer forum that's a safe space just to talk about, and we've just hosted it this morning, had 130 officers, and we talked about charge point operator performance to fleet electrification to council partnership working. So, just to kind of get people together and see what the elements are, and Transport for Wales are open to it. So we thought, it's a safe space. So, I mean, that's one thing we do. We provide all of our support free. There's a link in the website where we provide free guidance, because we see it as, you need potentially support and lessons learned from what we found. You've got grid constraints, which is the same in some of our rural areas. So we just want to be able to share. So we've reached out to OZEV about some of the support for our local EV, so it's called Levi scheme, which is only in England, but it looks at procurement, standardization, and how we can share that with devolved administration. So we just want to be able to try and network and support each other. So it's just more of it's there for officers now. We're happy to provide advice and support across, but we appreciate that it's your area, your area best, but we just wanted to say that, we are here to help, and we are, I say, fully funded by DFT.
Oh, definitely. And it's worth pointing out, obviously, Northern Ireland is its very own kind of jurisdiction when it comes to how to install that infrastructure, and certain things like the sort of meter cabinet needs to be built into type 2 posts, etc. But when it comes to the reliability of hardware and CPOs, your cumulative advice that you've got there, Heather, is invaluable. It's not just advice, it's experience, it's firsthand, where your local authority partners basically held to ransom when things went wrong. Did new hardware fall over after a couple of weeks, pretty much?
We did some polls about 2021 and 2022 and how the experience has been, so we can give quite reflective, but that is very much for local authority officers only, so we're able to share that between authorities. But as I say, we're not promoted by any charge point operators, we are just independent advice.
Superb. So there we go. And Heather, we'll let you two have a chat and introduce the rest of the local authority consortium. I think that would be a really good move, actually, because it is all about sharing that feedback. Of course, where things get interesting is there could be fantastic coverage for technical support in GB, but none in Northern Ireland. So there's all of these things to factor in as well. But at least, when it comes to the reliability of the physical hardware and the back office as well. You know, what's the odds of needing to call out a technician in the first place? That sort of thing is where, Heather, your team's advice is invaluable. And of course, I've been driving these things since 2009, so I'm happy to advise as well. But from the local authority perspective, your first-hand experience of that is invaluable. So thank you so much for putting your hand up. I think you did earlier as well. Sorry, I only just noticed it, but thank you so much.
I wasn't too sure if I was being rude, so but
No,
thank
oh,
you
no,
so
no.
much. So
No,
yeah, I will.
Yeah.
It's been a great conversation, and OZEV we've kickstarted today, by the way, and the rest. So I'll keep you in touch with that.
Superb. Thank you very much. And now over to everyone else's questions. I'm fully aware, by the way, it's now 1 o'clock. If any of our panelists or attendees need to drop off, I will not be in the least bit offended. Otherwise, we can fire some quick questions at you. In fact, all panelists are invited to have a look at the Q&A in the chat. And then I think probably the quickest way to do this is if there's any that are clearly questions that are aimed at yourselves, just type in the answer very quickly and we can try and get as many of these answered as possible. In fact, I think, yeah, Mark has been on it already, haven't you? Good stuff. Yeah, let's see. Question from an EVANI member, sorry, Darren Henderson. With Bangor gaining city status. Oh, congratulations. I've forgotten about that. Only has 22 kilowatt charge points. Yeah, and there's one that's been under repair since early this year. Enniskillen. I've heard all about this. Only has 5 charge points, only one of which is currently working. Actually, I believe, Thomas, you've got some exciting news on Enniskillen. But as an EV driver who requires access to these areas, it's very concerning. Can ESB give us an update on why these charge points have not been maintained? Before we go to John on that one, if John is... Yeah, John, you are still with us. Thomas, Enniskillen has now got some Weev charge points and Charger installed at it, doesn't it?
Right. Yes, we've the Bangor Court has six charging bays, and we've put a DC charger on that location, a 24 kilowatt DC, and we have actually signed contracts with some more location partners in Enniskillen and surrounding areas, as well as Bangor, by the way. So again, there is some more news to come from ourselves in the new year on both those locations. I would encourage people to, I suppose, venture out and look at the Weev and EasyGo and others that have apps. Again, I think back to your opening remark was that ESB run the charging network. I think just people need to be more aware of the other networks that are out there and putting in the hard graft to build out networks, that it's not just always referring to only 5 charge points. I think, you know, we've as many charge points in Bangor Court as maybe ESB have working in the whole of Fermanagh. So again, I just encourage users and consumers to be more aware, and I think that platforms like this allow that, to be more aware and conscious of other networks that are out there, as I say, putting in the hard yards to build out networks. Well
said. I'm aware that we've got quite a lot of questions here, so we'll try and get quick fire answers on these next ones. But obviously there is still the question from Darren for ESB. So the charge point that's been under repair since early this year in Bangor, and also Enniskillen, which has been a minefield of broken stuff recently. Any update on those, John? What's causing the delays on their return to service?
Updates for you, Euan. What I know, Darren, I'll take that offline and I'll have a chat with my ops guy and come back to him directly. I don't have specifics on individual sort of chargers. Enniskillen is a point that we've been engaging with sort of heavily actually over the last 6 months, looking for additional infrastructure locations there and to the west of the jurisdiction generally. So it's great to hear Weev have put some additional sort of chargers in there. All of those chargers that we already have right around Fermanagh, right around Enniskillen, etc., are due for replacement in the next sort of 12 weeks anyway, complete replacement. Depending on the age of some of that chargers and kit, it's uneconomical to repair them in the short term for sort of an 8 or 10 week period. But all of the availability of the individual chargers is available on our app. So you are able to see before you go there whether that charger is in fact working. But I will go back as an action to Darren with an update on that app. I have tried to contact my ops guy since I've seen that text or that post. And I'll revert to Darren directly once I hear back.
Thank you. Darren actually notes that his question wasn't from him directly, but from someone who couldn't attend the webinar. But nonetheless, if you liaise with Darren, we'll be able to hopefully get the answer back to the member who couldn't attend. And I'm pretty sure that given the number of hardware manufacturers and distributors who are in the audience today, that you might have an interested kind of stream of emails of people saying, so you've got some broken stuff. If you're wanting some quality kit to replace it, then we might be able to help. So events like this are always useful.
So all of that kit, the 100 chargers, are in Ireland, and they're in the process of being branded.
Oh, right. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So if this isn't the case, that none of the stock is ready to go. It is. The difficulty, and I kind of alluded to it earlier, is some of those chargers were installed many moons ago. They're simply not supported by the original manufacturer, even if that manufacturer is in business still. So I expect to see all of Enniskillen. It's on our priority list. We've identified a first sort of swathe of those chargers that are going to be replaced, and Enniskillen is one of those areas.
Good shout. And in fact, one bit of advice I'd give all the CPOs here for free. I'm aware that obviously there's lead time issues on just about everything in the world right now, but power modules for rapid chargers seem to be a bit of an issue. There are local companies who will specialize in control electronics and power electronics, including not just design and manufacture, but repair. There's one down in Yorkshire whose name annoyingly evades me, and there's one in Fife called Supply Design, I remember as much. And there's a few others dotted about the place, but there's probably some in Northern Ireland too. Chances are that if you've got a popped power module and it's going to take months for a new one to turn up, it might be worth approaching one of these companies. Might be able to send it a few miles down the road, repair it, and get it back stronger than it ever was. Here's one. I'll start with Mark, and then hopefully CPOs. So in other words, Chris Kelly, Thomas and John Byrne, raise your hand if you have any input on this one. Are the panel worried about the lack of charging sites planned for the North Coast? And this is me being a GB idiot with my pronunciation, or Coleraine areas. Mark, tell us more.
Yeah, it's definitely one that we hear about all the time, Euan. It's the Monaco of Northern Ireland, the North Coast. It's where everybody heads in the holidays. So particularly in the summertime, it can be very busy and a lot of frustrated EV drivers on the North Coast. Saying that, the guys will maybe be able to comment for themselves, but we've definitely talked to several CPOs that have plans for that part of the world as well. So I'd like to think there'll be a good change there, certainly sometime next year. But I guess it's like all of Northern Ireland. There's hardly an area in Northern Ireland where you couldn't say we need more, but there are certain areas like the Causeway Council. We met representatives maybe about 2 months ago, and they realised that there are issues up there, and they're working as well. So I think with another big Gulf, the Open's coming back to Portrush as well. Is it next year? And Mercedes are a sponsor of that. No doubt there'll be a lot of electric Mercedes-Benz cars up in that part of the world. So yeah, I think that there are things underway there, and it's never fast enough for any of us, but hopefully things are on the move.
So for our 3 CPOs here today, thumbs up if you have plans in that area, the North Coast area at the moment. Hey, there we go. Excellent. So it's coming soon. John Miskelly asks, or Miskelly, so again, being a GB idiot with my pronunciations, when is EV charging being installed with access in street lamp? So basically, yeah, the street lamp post like Ubitricity and stuff like that, where it's actually installed into the lamp post itself. Just like in London. Any plans for stuff like that in Northern Ireland? I suppose one of the first things would be, remind me, are most of the lampposts on DFI streets, are they installed at the curbside or at building side? Because that would be one of the key.
I think the overall authority for those, I think, is DFI owns every one of them, I think, and they've been through a process of upgrading those recently to LED. I think NIE probably has a part to play in there as well, because they're non-metered and stuff. So I think it's probably more challenging.
Maybe I could, Thomas, maybe I could just jump in from DFI's perspective. It is something that's been brought to us in the past. I suppose the first thing I would say is, and it's not my specialist area, I'm not an engineer, but I spoke to our colleagues in that area. The lampposts in Northern Ireland are not on a continuous 24-hour supply, for number one. Number two, there would need to be legislation introduced to change their usage. And number three, I think from an NIE perspective, Chris, you can whack me if I get this wrong, to put the type of supply into those lampposts that would be required right across the province would be a absolutely major resource, not just from a manpower perspective, but financially, to have upgraded those to make them suitable for EVs. Now, for EV charging, please don't hang me if I didn't get that exactly right, because as I say, there are engineers in my department who would be fit to and would be far better placed than me to comment. But it is something that's been brought to our attention. It is something that within the department we have looked at as things currently sit.
Good to know. And yeah, it's a shame about the power supply thing. That's a very valid point. Although that said, that hopefully means that there's some substation capacity that will be freed up for a separate supply 24, possibly, I don't know. But Chris, were you?
There's other issues as to where they are actually located on the paths as well. There's a raft of issues around this. Look, it's not just it's not just a simple issue, but it is something that we're mindful and aware of, that there has been inquiries in this regard.
Yeah, I think just from a connection point of view, street lighting is very low load. You know, there's not a lot of demand associated with that, and typically the DFI installations at the moment there's a supply taken to a pillar, and from that then there's private wiring taken out to all the street lights. That I'm not sure whether it would have been designed to cope with the appropriate loads that we would be talking about from chargers, and may fully need to be upgraded. But from a network point of view, it would be a load increase that would need to be considered associated with what are you talking about connecting here from a charge point perspective, and we would need to assess and potentially reinforce the network like other charge points.
Fair play. I've just been told we've got 5 minutes left. We're already over the 2-hour limit. Everyone on this is a legend for staying on, by the way, including the attendees. I mean, we've still got like 70 attendees, such as the popularity of this topic. That is clearly valuable input that you've all provided today. Martin Young asks, is there a list anywhere that lets us know where you need to pay for on-street parking while charging? Because he understands it varies by location. I think I've heard stories of this from EVANI before, where people who are from a local authority that doesn't charge for parking whilst charging then go to another local authority and do get fined. Is there anywhere that is consolidated? Anne, is there any information with regards to this? Because this will be important for OZEV.
That would probably fall to us, Anne. Unless you really want to answer that.
No, I was sorry, Euan, I was going to ask you to repeat
That's all right.
the question, but John, go ahead.
Why run in?
Yeah, so in certain circumstances, you can charge your electric vehicle in the spot, and there is no on-street parking associated with that. And in other places, there is. Is that? I take it that's the question.
Yeah. So it's basically, is there a list available somewhere where you can see which local authorities you have to pay for a parking ticket whilst you're charging, versus the ones where if you're charging, you don't need to pay for a parking ticket?
So if it's on street, then yes, and it's marked out on each location what the rules and regulations are around that. And yes, I think there is a list somewhere that would actually tell you what the restrictions are in each of those areas. Now, whether or not it's in, and then you've got on top of that, you've got pay and display car parks, and some of those are owned by the department, some are owned by council, and it's pretty obvious when you're a pay and display car park, you have to pay, regardless if you're charging or not. If you're on street, it depends on the location of the actual charge point, what the rules and regulations are on that particular street.
As long as the requirement for you need a parking ticket whilst you're charging, even if you're charging, is
so if you go to a charge point on street and it's got a 2-hour limit to park there, and you park there for 2.5, you get to charge your vehicle, you're going to be susceptible to a ticket.
Oh yeah, but it's more a case of if it's if the parking like for an ICE car nearby was going to be, say, like £2 an hour or something like that, would you need to pay those £2 an hour for that ticket you get out the parking meter next to the charge point whilst you're charging? Or because you're charging, this local authority offers a waiver of that, so you don't actually need to get a parking ticket whilst you're charging? That's what I think the query is mainly about. It's not so much about overstaying, it's more about having to pay to park as well as pay to charge.
Yeah. I would need to speak to our car parking officer for that detail, Euan.
Yeah, because that is something that has caused confusion, and if that was to be put online somewhere, nice and simple, share it with EVANI and they can broadcast that everywhere, no doubt. Given
on street, on street where there's a parking fee, you have to pay.
Fair play.
Simple as that. If it's £2 to park your car, you have to pay £2 if that's on the street. If it's in a car park, will be a fee, you have to pay. If you overstay, there's penalties, etc.
Yeah, that's interesting, because in Scotland there's some local authorities where if you're plugged in and charging, you don't need to pay. But there's other local authorities where if you are plugged in and charging, you still have to pay, for the parking.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay, good to know. There's so many good questions on here. Unfortunately, this will be the first time in the FASTA project we've not been able to answer all the questions, but I think a final one. Without a sitting executive, can we access any additional funding that might come as a result of those Barnett consequentials? That's probably one for Leo, isn't it, who's not here today? But it's a really good question. Yeah, that has basically been one of the key messages from this, is that there is funding available, and we do need an executive or DFE to say, okay, we've ring-fenced this funding that's being spent on upgrading grid connections, not just for charging infrastructure, but for electric heating as well. I mean, obviously there'll be a lot of people watching this in Northern Ireland who might be living in quite a nice big house in a fairly new build suburban estate that's still fairly close to a fairly big town centre. So why have you got a massive tank of heating oil in your back garden? If that was Scotland, we would think, what the heck is going on there? You'd be either fully electric heating or on the gas mains. And obviously the trend is now towards fully electric heating. You'd have a heat pump or something like that. That is just bonkers to us that heating oil is even a thing outside of very, very rural locations. So I'm aware that actually, if anything, that gives Northern Ireland a very good starting point, because you're starting effectively from a clean slate. In terms of building a grid, it will be the electricity grid. The money has not been wasted on gas as such. It's being built for electricity. And of course, if you start bringing in like vehicle to load or vehicle to home or vehicle to grid capability of modern electric vehicles, that becomes part of the solution, not part of the burden. You can actually use, I'm using my Leaf to power my house right now. And, there'll be more EVs that will be able to do stuff like that soon. So on a cold winter's day, you can use that off-peak electricity and avoid that peak time on the grid. You can avoid the peak stress at local and national level. It's such a no-brainer. So, that's obviously kind of going into a much wider point. And unfortunately, we have run out of time. But honestly, thank you so much to all of our panelists today. Again, Mark McCall, EVANI, Jody O'Boyle, Utility Regulator for Northern Ireland, Chris Maguire, NIE Networks, Anne Artt from Derry City and Strabane District Council, leading the OZEV Orcs grant, John Starkey, DFI, Thomas O'Hagan, Weev, John Byrne, ESB ecars, Chris Kelly, EasyGo, Heather Foster, impromptu appearance, cameo appearance to do with local authority side of things with EST. Have I missed anyone? I probably have. I've unfortunately lost my paperwork. It's just
Donal working hard in the background.
Of course, Donal, of course. Thank you, Anne. Donal being a legend as always. Thank you so much for everything you do. And it has been such a successful 2022. We will be back in the new year, Wednesday, 11th of January, 2023 at 8 p.m. So more of you can join. I'm aware that normally we have to do these things during business hours because we're dealing with businessy people, but we're going to be talking at 8 p.m. about some of the EV trends for 2023 that we're excited about, but also the headline act is going to be EV accessibility and inclusivity. There's going to be some very interesting panelists on there. It's all about making sure that charging infrastructure is as safe and as accessible for everyone, whether you're a lone person traveling at night, whether you're in a wheelchair, or whether you've got like a particularly big vehicle that obviously like articulated lorries are going to need a charge at some point. So yeah, that's going to be a fascinating session. In the meantime, have a fantastic Christmas holiday, everyone, when it comes, and we will see you in the new year for more FASTA Project webinars. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ian.